Hi everyone, this is Isaac Steinkamp from the Chess Summit Network. This is my first YouTube video on this channel, and I'm really excited to start Chess Summit with a YouTube component rather than just a WordPress blog like I have for the past couple of months. Just a little bit about myself. I'm rated about 1950 or so, and last year I coached my high school team to the National High School Chess Championships, and they won the U1200 section. So I know a little bit about how 1,000 to 1,500 rated players think, and that's one of the key things I kind of want to address with my blog and my YouTube video is how should you progress if you're in that 1,000 to 1,500 range? What does that next level look like? How can I, look deeper into the position and just see things from more than just a fork or a pin, or how do I understand that I'm better even though I'm not necessarily materially, ahead? And so most of the ideas that I want to talk about on my YouTube channel are positional chess ideas. And so before I get started with a game that I played, I'd like to show a game that I saw two 900s play a couple years ago at a tournament that I was tournament directing at. And so white opened up with e4, c5, and white on move 2 played d3, very passive approach and not exactly orthodox. Of course, white's more comfortable usually playing knight f3 with the idea of playing d4, or with knight c3 with a close Sicilian, or maybe f4 with a Grand Prix. But d3 is definitely unorthodox, and generally when you see someone play d3, it's because they're not quite comfortable with theory, not because they're going to transpose into a close Sicilian later with the idea of knight c3, g3, and f4. Maybe you might see this, but it's not even the recommended move order transposition for that line. So d3 is definitely very passive. And so black played knight c6, white played knight f3, black played d6, and white played bishop b2. And in this position I asked both of the players who did they think was better, and both of the players said the position was equal, and their reasoning was, well, after black plays knight f6, black has two pieces developed, and white has two pieces developed. And one of them went so far as to say white might even be better because he can castle immediately. And this is a fairly common misconception at this rating level, and this leads into the first theme that I really want to talk about, optimization. And if you look at the board really quick, it's particularly at this e2 bishop, he can't really do anything in this position. He really needs to be on c4 or b5, where he's at least pinning the knight to the king, or targeting f7. And so what do I mean by optimization? Well, my formal definition of optimization is when a piece is put on the best possible square in the opening, it'll have to move the fewest amount of times later in the middle game. And as you see, this bishop on e2, he's going to have to move at least one more time to find some sort of activity later on. Whereas if the piece was on c4, it might not have to move because this diagonal is effective enough for a kingside attack to happen, or maybe a tactic on f7. So bishop to e2 definitely does not, it's not a great move for white. And even though this game petered out to a draw, black was much better throughout the whole game. And this is a very subtle concept, but if you're the black player here, obviously you want to develop your pieces actively. So probably your bishop goes on g7, you can put your bishop on like e6 or g4, and you just play principal chess. And that's really the main thing for players 1,000 to 1,500, is finding ways to incorporate the main chess principles into their play and being more consistent with them. So optimization is definitely one of the big themes I'm going to be talking about pretty much for all my videos. So I want to show a game that I played back in 2012 where my opponent kind of failed to grasp this concept. And my opponent at this time was high 1400. He wound up breaking 1500 at the tournament, actually. But in this game, he was definitely uncomfortable with the way the opening played out. So, oops. Knight f3, d6. So it's a Rossolimo defense. And I played knight d7, which is not as common. I wouldn't play this today, but I was comfortable with it at the time. And so my opponent castled. Everything here is fine. I played a6, which I don't even think is book. But I really just wanted to challenge this bishop on b5. And I didn't, I'd seen this player play, all week the week before. I knew he was a d4 player, so I figured he wasn't really comfortable with the e4 opening. So I wanted to challenge him immediately. And so he played bishop c4. And for those of you who are Rossolimo players, you guys know that that's pretty much a crime. You have to take this knight on d7. And as you see in this this game, in the first 15 moves or so, white's going to fall very far behind in development. So after bishop c4, I thought about playing b5 immediately, but I didn't like the idea of bishop d5, so I just stuck with principled chess. I just played knight on g to f6. My opponent played rook to e1. Not exactly a great move because he's not really threatening e5. I mean, I could always play e5 myself, but he's already neglected the development of his bishop and his knight over here on c1 and b1. So I'm not quite clear as to what my opponent's doing. So, in this position, I have no real way to improve my bishops immediately. So I decided to just go ahead and go for an attack. So I just played b5, just test my opponent, see what he wants to do. Obviously, bishop b3 results in c4. Bishop d5, knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, knight f6 might be uncomfortable for a pawn on d5. So my opponent took a drastic measure and played bishop to f1. And so he's already moved it 3 times, and it's on the same square that it was back in the beginning of the game. And, I've shown this position to a couple of my students, and, they all said, well, this is not good for white. White's moved this 3 times, and it's not optimized. This bishop's going to have to move at least 1 more time in order to find some sort of plan later on in the middle game. So if you look at developments, white's really kind of failed. This rook on e1's, it's threatening e5, but with my next move e5, I take care of all of white's threats in this position. So right now, my plan is develop and make sure I limit all of white's play. Whereas white's plan is get pieces into the game and see how he can recover from this opening. My opponent played c3 with the idea of d4. This idea doesn't quite work yet, so I just decided to develop my pieces, forcing moves, putting pressure on e4 for my knight on f6, my bishop on b7. White's going to have to find a way to protect this pawn. He chooses to move the bishop again, which I found surprising. I was expecting maybe like d3 or queen c2, but queen c2, I guess my opponent didn't like the idea of having to take with the rook. But by playing bishop to d3, he's now moved it 4 times, and it's actually in the worst square of all 4 of the times he's moved it, because now this d2 pawn really blocks in this bishop, and this knight can't go to its 2 most natural squares. And knight a3, knight c2 takes time, which white doesn't really have in the opening. And so after bishop d3, I just developed normally, bishop e7. I'm ready to castle. So all I'm going to do now is just make sure white can't find any space. So bishop to c2. And in this position, it is critical to understand that white is already planning something. He's planning this d4 push, so d2 to d4. And if white can get away with d2, d4 and open up the position, while he's definitely behind, he's not going to be so much worse that I can't exploit the position. So while I can't stop d4, I need to find ideas tactically that will help me kind of play down white's push in the center. And so my thought here was, if white plays d4 and I play c takes and he plays c takes, this c file is wide open. This bishop is misplaced on c2 and this bishop on c1. If I can get enough attack on it, he's going to have a defender in the back rank holding it, since the knight on b1 is cutting off this rook. And so in this position, while I couldn't stop d4 immediately, I decided to put my pieces in the c file. So I started with queen c7, and this is a good move because it's a natural square for the queen, but also I have the plan of rook c8 later. My opponent played d4 anyways. I'm assuming he just didn't see my idea here with rook c8, but already white's having to move the bishop again, and this still is not a very good square for this bishop. Bishop b3 might have even been a better square for the bishop, but here on d3, the bishop again is not optimized because it's not on a good square, and it's going to have to move again. And while white's been moving this bishop, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 moves. Well, if you look at my pieces on the board, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, literally all of the pieces that I've already developed, it's taken 6 moves to develop them, whereas white's bishop has moved the 6 moves that it's taken me to develop my pieces. So in this position, I'm definitely much better. And the main question in these kinds of positions is how. And this is where if you do your tactics every day, your work is definitely going to pay off. And I'm going to stop here, and I want you to find a good move for black. So probably about 20 or so seconds. Try to figure out how to exploit the fact that white hasn't quite developed his position yet. There's something definitely fishy. Okay, so if you haven't found the move yet, I would recommend pausing the video. But I found the move, knight takes e4, exclam. with the idea that if bishop takes, rook takes, and then queen takes c1 gets me my pawn, because after queen takes c1, I have rook takes c1 check, and I'm just much better. And after d takes e, bishop takes, White's traded off this bishop that he's moved 7 times, because after bishop takes e4 is the 7th move. He moved his bishop 7 times to trade it off with a knight that only moved twice. So he essentially traded 5 moves. And an idea that I learned a couple of years ago was if you waste 3 tempos, that's the equivalent of a pawn. So my opponent's essentially lost 1 plus pawns. So even though I won a pawn in this tactic, it's more like a 1, 2 or more pawns, because my opponent has moved his bishop so many times. And so my opponent played knight c3, and I played bishop b7, and I won 10 moves later or so. But I kind of want to stop the video here to kind of just show how, because White wasn't really comfortable with the opening, that I was just able to dominate the position with very little calculation. It's just a matter of, okay, what are my opponent's ideas? He wants to play e5 in this position, so I'm going to play e5. Okay, he wants to play c3. How do I stop him from playing d4? I'll play bishop b7. He plays bishop d3, so he has no plan on this move, so I'll play bishop e7. He plays bishop c2. His idea again is d4, so I'm just going to get my pieces on the c file, and now I have this nice tactic of knight takes e4. And so it was very methodical, and all of my moves had a purpose. And that's another thing that I'm not quite happy with some coaches who coach about 1,000 rated players out of a cookie cutter curriculum, is that they just say develop your pieces, and it's just vaguely put your pieces and put pressure in the center and castle quickly, and then you're ready to go in the middle game, and the planning starts there. Your planning starts on move 1 when you make your first move. Everything should already kind of be together. There's where you put your pieces has definite significance for the middle game. I was working with a 1600 early last year, and we were playing an opening, a very simple opening, and I was asking her, why are you developing your bishop there? Why are you developing your knight there? And her answer was always, well, I'm just developing my pieces, and that's what I'm supposed to do. But there was no plan. There was no thematic idea, which is something I want to talk about in my next video. And so one thing I hope that you got out of this video is that putting your pieces, matter, like where you put them matter. And in this game, I was able to find, good move after good move, whereas my opponent kept on moving his bishop back and forth. So that being said, I hope you check out my next video, which should come out any day this week. And that being said, thanks for watching. Goodbye.